Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's not a whole lot of bills that I relish coming in and speaking about in this place, but this is one of them. And I rise to speak on the Fair Work Registered Organisations Amendment Withdrawal from Amalgamation Bill of 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want you to imagine this scenario. I want you to think of a 19-year-old lad working on a commercial building site in Melbourne in around about 1987. And that young lad was about 75 kilos dripping wet. It was his first day of his apprenticeship. And most people who would know who've worked on building sites would know that apprentices in their first year, well, you know, their productivity may not be so great, but this was day one. And I was that apprentice. And I was working, it was my first day on the job of my apprenticeship. And I was working on a high-rise construction site in Melbourne. And I was sweeping the floor as any good first-year apprentice would do. And I had these two big gorillas come up to me. And one of them drove his finger into my chest and said, "Slow down, son, slow down." Now, I was 19. As I said, I would have been 70 kilos wringing wet, and I was scared out of my wits. Now, some 35-odd years later, I'm really proud to say that I'm glad those two gorillas did what they did, because I probably wouldn't be standing here but for that workplace of intimidation. Now, of course, that wasn't executed by members of the CFMEU, because the CFMEU didn't exist back then. That was back in the days of Normie Gallagher's Builders Labourers Federation, back in the bad old days in the 1980s, when literally people's legs and arms were broken. And I was absolutely scared out of my mind by these two guys. The fact that these two gentlemen, and I'll use that term extremely loosely, A, could assault me as a kid, and B, tell me to slow down because I was sweeping the floor too quickly. Give me a break. But that really kicked off my immense dislike for construction unions. Now, I am not anti-union. I think that the unions have done a lot of good in industrial workplaces in this country and throughout the world. What I am against is union thuggery, union bullying. And it really, really upsets me when I hear members opposite talking about the importance of safe workplaces and not having an environment where people feel like they are threatened at work. And yet the Labor Party continue to take $4.5 million a year for their election campaigns from the CFMEU. That's what really upsets me. I'm not anti-union. I am absolutely not anti-union. In fact, believe it or not, I actually used to be a member of a union. I couldn't get my apprenticeship, my carpentry apprenticeship, unless I joined the Builders Labourers Federation. Can you believe that? I couldn't get my apprenticeship. Back in the days of the 80s, there were signs up on every building site, in cities across this country. Do you know what they said? They said, no ticket, no start. Meaning, if you didn't have If you weren't a card-carrying member of the BLF, you couldn't work on that building site. And John Howard, to his credit, brought in rules of freedom of association. That event, back when I was a kid, irrevocably shaped who I am today. It angered me so much that I wanted to... people say, oh, how did you start off in public life, or what made you go into politics? Lots of things, but that was one of them. I don't want to live in a community. I do not want to live in a country where guerrillas, where goons can drive their fingers into people's chests, kids, and threaten them because they're working too hard, because they're pushing a broom too fast. So when this bill came up, and I'm really glad the member for Kennedy's in here. It's a shame he wasn't in here earlier, where he could have heard my earlier remarks about the CFMEU. But the Labor Party had an opportunity. The Labor Party had an opportunity to accept a bill that we put in place back in 2020 to demerge, to give certain unions the ability to demerge from other unions if they felt that they no longer shared the ethos of the unions that they were involved with. Now, Labor that bill was passed in 2020 when we were in government, and Labor reversed those laws in February of this year. Why? Because John Setka didn't like it. No other reason. John Setka didn't like it. Now, the textile, clothing and footwear sector, which has the greatest number of women, face significant issues within the CFMEU. The toxic male-dominated culture that I've seen on building sites my entire life. It should not come as any great surprise that a union that is heavily frequented, or membership of women, wouldn't support the sort of rubbish that we have seen being perpetrated by the CFMEU. And so, they wanted to demerge. They wanted to get out of the CFMEU. Everybody, it seems, wants to leave the CFMEU. Back in 2020, that's because they look after you, Bob. Back in 2020, it was the maritime workers who wanted to demerge from the CFMEU. The way the CFMEU is going, they're going to have to change their name to the Sea, because no one wants to be a part of them. No other industry, no other union wants to be a part of the CFMEU because of the appalling conduct. There's another miner. He's one of them who doesn't want to be a part of the CFMEU. Who doesn't want to be a part of the CFMEU because of the appalling conduct of people like John Setka. The Labor Party have now had an epiphany just in the last couple of weeks. And I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, you might be thinking, what is this epiphany? Well, the epiphany is that the member for Watson has finally come to his senses and realised that, you know what, the coalition actually had it right back in 2020. Unions should have the ability to demerge from other unions if they feel it's in their best interests. But this come-to-Jesus moment, this road to Damascus, only happened after John Setka effectively tried to hold the country to ransom when he took on the AFL. That the AFL seems to have more power, more sway than just about any other organisation in this country. Now, I want to declare a conflict of interest at this point, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the member for Watson had this road to Damascus moment because John Setka came out and said publicly that he wanted to take on Stephen McBurney. He said things like, I think it will have implications for the AFL right across Australia. We have an obligation to pursue anti-union, anti-worker expletives like him, and we will until the end of the earth. And there's a whole range of things. He threatened the Australian government, the Australian taxpayers, with effectively economic coercion, with stopping jobs or certainly slowing them down if the AFL didn't sack Stephen McBurney. Now, where's my conflict of interest? I went to school with Stephen McBurney at St Bede's College in Mentone. We were in the same year. He's not a mate of mine, which I don't, it's just, I don't dislike him, but he wasn't a friend of mine, but I went to school with him. And he has been a really faithful servant of the AFL. He acted as the AFL chief umpire, and now, after his term as the Australian Building Construction Commission head, he's got his job back. Why has he got his job back? Well, because the Labor Party abolished the ABCC. What we're seeing here today is the reason why we needed the ABCC in the first place. For people like John Setka and the thugs, not everybody in the CFMEU are thugs, certainly, but the leadership of the CFMEU have proven time and time again. The federal court, time and time again, have said that this CFMEU is the most recidivist union organisation in Australia that continues to cop fines imposed by the federal court, and the CFMEU treat those fines as the cost of doing business. It's just the cost of doing business. And it wasn't until laws were passed which enabled the federal court to impose fines personally upon officials of the CFMEU that they actually started to sit up and take a little bit of notice. But when Stephen McBurney, who is otherwise a good man, was doing his job as a public servant and running the Australian Building and Construction Commission, but in doing so, he was effectively the policeman. He was effectively the police commissioner. And he brought prosecutions against the CFMEU, and John Setka went after him and forbade the AFL from employing him. And if the AFL didn't take the warning from the CFMEU, then all AFL job sites would just grind to a halt. Because this is what the CFMEU do. This is their modus operandi. If you don't join the union, I know from my personal history, if you don't join the union, we're going to black ban you. We're going to black ban you not just on this site, we're going to black ban you on every other site in this country until we bring you to your knees. That is the way the CFMEU operate. And they tried to do the same intimidatory tactics as they do on every other single building site in this country, on every day in this calendar year. And the years past, that's what they tried to do with the AFL. And now the member for Watson has this epiphany. Oh, this is terrible. We should allow those unions, those smaller unions, to demerge. Well, shame on the member for Watson. Shame on every single member in this House who receives a benefit from the CFMEU in financial means to their campaigns, to their head campaign, Shame on them for taking that blood money, because that's exactly what it is, blood money. And you should all,
the member's time
you should all be
has
ashamed of
expired.
yourselves.